The fork clattered against the porcelain plate with a sound that echoed through my dining room like a gunshot. 23 pairs of eyes turned toward David as he pushed away my beef bourguignon, the same dish that had won me 3 consecutive blue ribbons at the county fair, and said the words that would change both our lives forever. No offense, Margaret, but this tastes like something you'd scrape off a cafeteria floor. The silence that followed was suffocating. My daughter Emily's face drained of color. My hands, still warm from pulling homemade sourdough from the oven, froze mid-air. The family gathering I'd spent 3 days preparing for, the welcome dinner from my daughter's new husband, crystallized into a single moment of humiliation I would never forget. But here's what David didn't know as he smugly reached for his phone to order takeout. That insult would eventually cost him exactly $487,000 over the next 4 years, and he would pay every penny with a smile on his face. This is the story of how culinary contempt became my greatest motivation, how a mother's wounded pride transformed into Michelin-starred triumph, and how the man who mocked my cooking ended up becoming my restaurant's most loyal and expensive customer. Let me take you back to that evening, 3 years and 8 months ago. It was a crisp October night in Portland, Oregon, and I had prepared what I believed to be the perfect welcome feast. My daughter Emily had been dating David for 2 years before they eloped in a surprise courthouse wedding. This dinner was meant to be our first real family gathering as an expanded clan, a chance for David to truly become part of our traditions. I had started preparing 2 days in advance. The beef bourguignon had been my signature dish for over 30 years, perfected through countless iterations and passed down from my own grandmother, who'd learned it during a summer in Burgundy in 1952. The meat, sustainably raised beef from a farm just outside Hood River, had been marinating for 48 hours in a full-body Burgundy, aromatics and herbs I'd grown in my own garden. The pearl onions were caramelized to golden perfection. The mushrooms, foraged by a local mycologist I'd befriended at the farmer's market, added an earthy depth that elevated the dish beyond the ordinary. Accompanying this were garlic and herb roasted fingerling potatoes, a haricot vert salad with toasted almonds and a champagne vinaigrette, the aforementioned sourdough bread, made from a starter I'd maintained for 12 years, and a chocolate torte with house-made vanilla bean ice cream for dessert. The dining room was set with my grandmother's china, each piece carefully hand-washed and arranged. Candles flickered along the center of the table, casting a warm glow over the faces of my family. My husband, Robert, our son, Marcus, and his wife, Jennifer, Emily's 3 siblings from my first marriage, and several close family friends who had watched Emily grow up. And then there was David. David was a 32-year-old tech entrepreneur who had sold his first startup at 28 and was working on his second. He wore expensive clothes in a way that seemed calculated to appear casual, a $400 distressed t-shirt under a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. His watch alone could have funded a semester of college tuition. He'd grown up in Manhattan, attended Yale, and had the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money or status. When I served the first course, a butternut squash soup with crispy sage and brown butter, he'd smiled politely but barely touched it. "Not really a soup guy," he had said with a shrug. The salad met the same fate. "I'm more of a protein person," he explained, though he made no move to eat more than a forkful. But it was the main course, my beloved, my pride, my beef bourguignon, that triggered his fatal mistake. I watched as he took his first bite. I saw his face contort slightly, not into an expression of disgust exactly, but something close to it. Confusion, perhaps? Disappointment, certainly. And then came the fork clatter, the comment, and the request for pizza. "David," Emily hissed, her face flushed with embarrassment. "What? I'm just being honest. You always say we should be honest with your family, right?" He looked around the table as if seeking allies. "Come on, guys. It's trying to be French cuisine, but it's just not. It's overcooked, the flavors are muddy, and the wine sauce is too acidic. I've had actual beef bourguignon at La Bernardine, and trust me, this isn't it." The table remained silent. My husband Robert's hand found mine under the table, squeezing it tight. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the sting of tears threatening behind my eyes, but I wouldn't cry, not in front of him. "Margaret," David continued, seemingly oblivious to the social devastation he was causing, has anyone actually told you the truth about your cooking? Because enabling you doesn't help anyone. You're a sweet lady and all, but cooking just isn't your thing. And that's okay. Not everyone can cook. Maybe you're great at other stuff. My son Marcus started to stand up, his jaw clenched, but Jennifer pulled him back down. Emily looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. I took a deep breath, set down my own fork, with considerably more grace than David had managed, and said quietly, I see. Well, David, I appreciate your candor. Please, don't let me keep you from ordering something you'd actually enjoy. That night, after everyone had left, David and Emily departing early in an Uber he'd called before his pizza even arrived, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by pounds of leftover food. Robert found me there at midnight, sitting in the dark, staring at the pot of bourguignon. Robert said, He's an asshole. I replied, He's Emily's husband. He's an asshole husband, then. I looked at my hands, at the cuts and burns accumulated over decades of cooking, at the age spots and wrinkles that marked over 60 years of life. I said slowly, Robert, what if he's right? What if I've been cooking mediocre food all these years and everyone's just been too polite to say so? Robert pulled me to my feet and led me to the refrigerator where dozens of thank you cards, photos from dinner parties, and handwritten recipe requests were held up by magnets. Does this look like mediocre to you? Margaret, you've been cooking for this family, for our friends, for community events for 40 years. You've raised thousands of dollars for charity with your bake sales. You've taught cooking classes at the community center. You've been playing in the kiddie pool, I interrupted. David's right about one thing. I've never actually tested myself against real chefs, real standards. I've been a big fish in a very small pond. That's when the idea first crystallized. It started as a whisper of wounded pride, a flicker of defiance, but it grew rapidly into something more substantial, more urgent. Robert, I said, turning to face him, what if I went to culinary school? He blinked. You're 62 years old. So what? So nothing, I guess, but why? Why would you? To prove him wrong, I said simply, or to prove him right and finally know the truth. Either way, I need to know.
The decision that changed everything. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. My children were grown and launched. Robert's engineering practice was well established and largely ran itself. Our mortgage was paid off. We had savings, investments, and no major financial obligations. For the first time in my adult life, I could do something just for me. But culinary school at my age? The idea seemed simultaneously exhilarating and absurd. I spent the entire day researching. I learned that while professional culinary training was traditionally the domain of young people looking to start careers, there was actually a growing trend of older students attending culinary school, some for career changes, others for personal enrichment, and a few, like me, to finally legitimize and refine a lifelong passion. The Culinary Institute of America had a continuing education program. Le Cordon Bleu offered intensive courses. But as I dug deeper, I kept returning to one name, Institut Culinaire de Paris, a smaller elite institution that offered an intensive one-year program specifically designed for serious adult learners who wanted to master French cuisine. There was just one problem. It was in Paris, and it cost $85,000, not including living expenses. When I told Robert that evening, I braced for resistance. Instead, he looked at me for a long moment and said, When do you leave? Robert, it's expensive. It's a year in France. Margaret, I've watched you light up over a perfectly reduced sauce and stress over whether a soufflé will rise for 40 years. I've seen you spend entire days perfecting a single recipe. You've supported every crazy dream I've ever had, building that ridiculous treehouse for the kids, buying the vintage motorcycle, taking 6 months off to help my brother's startup. This is your turn. When do you leave? I kissed him then, tasting the salt of my own tears. January, I whispered. The program starts in January. That Thanksgiving, 3 weeks after David's insult, I made an announcement at our family dinner. Emily and David were conspicuously absent. They were spending the holiday with their family in the Hamptons, which made the conversation easier. I'm going to Paris in January, I told the gathered family. I've been accepted into an intensive culinary program at one of France's premier cooking schools. I'll be gone for a year. The reactions ranged from shock to excitement to concern. Marcus immediately pulled out his phone to help me look for apartments. My daughter Sarah offered to visit during spring break. My youngest Thomas just grinned and said, "Mom's going to become a badass French chef. I love it." But it was my husband who added the detail I'd been afraid to mention. And when she comes back, she's going to open a restaurant. The room went quiet. "Robert," I said carefully, "I never said—" "You didn't have to," he replied. "I know you, Margaret. You're not going to France just to prove David wrong about one dinner. You're going to come back and show everyone what you're really capable of. So yes, when you come back, we're opening a restaurant. I've already talked to Jerry about converting the old textile warehouse on Division Street. He owes me a favor and he's willing to let us lease it for practically nothing while we renovate." I stared at my husband. This man who had been by my side for 38 years, who apparently knew me better than I knew myself. "A restaurant," I repeated, the word feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "A restaurant," he confirmed. "But first, Paris. Paris and the making of a chef." I arrived in Paris on a gray January morning with 2 suitcases, a basic understanding of French that I'd cramped into my brain through Duolingo, and a heart full of determination and doubt in equal measure. The Institut Culinaire de Paris was housed in a beautiful 19th century building in the 15th arrondissement, all tall windows and classic Paris architecture. My class consisted of 12 students, a former Wall Street banker seeking a career change, a food blogger from Singapore looking to add credentials to her brand, a recently divorced woman from Texas treating this as an expensive form of therapy, 3 younger students fresh out of college, 2 men in their 50s who'd always dreamed of opening bistros, and a Japanese woman who had been a sushi chef for 20 years and wanted to master French technique. And then there was me, Margaret Chin Patterson, 62 years old, a mother of 4, grandmother of 2, and the oldest person in the program by a decade. Our head instructor was Chef Philippe Rousseau, a Melière Ouvrière de France, one of the highest honors in French cuisine, who had worked under Joël Rocheboom and held 3 Michelin stars before retiring from restaurant work to teach. He was in his 70s, rail thin, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through to your soul, and a reputation for being absolutely merciless. On the first day, he walked down our line of cooking stations, examining each of us with undisguised skepticism. When he reached me, he stopped. "You," he said in heavily accented English, "why are you here?" "To learn, chef." "No. Why are you really here? You are grandmother, yes? You should be at home spoiling the grandchildren, cooking, how do you say, casseroles?" I felt the feel heat of anger rise in my chest, the same anger I'd felt when David mocked my cooking. But this time, I channeled it differently. "Chef," I said, meeting his eyes, "I've been cooking for 40 years. I've cooked tens of thousands of meals. I've fed my family, my community, and myself. But I've never known if I was truly good or just surrounded by people who were too kind to tell me otherwise. Someone recently told me my cooking was terrible, and I need to know if he was right. I need to know what I'm actually capable of. That's why I'm here." Chef Rousseau studied me for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled, a small, almost imperceptible upturn of his lips. "Bon," he said simply, "this is a good reason. But wanting to know is not enough. You must be willing to work, to fail, to be humiliated, to break down everything you think you know and rebuild it correctly. Are you willing to do this? Yes, chef, I said without hesitation. We shall see, he replied and moved on.
That first week nearly broke me. We started with knife skills, something I thought I had mastered over decades of home cooking. I was wrong. Chef Roussel stood behind me as I attempted to julienne carrots, and I felt his disappointment radiating like heat. "No, no, no," he exclaimed, stopping my hand. "You are holding the knife like a child holds a crayon. Your fingers, look at them, they are a disaster waiting to happen. And your cuts, madame. One piece is 3 millimeters, another is 5. This is unacceptable. In French cuisine, precision is respect. Respect for the ingredient, respect for the diner, respect for the tradition. You have no respect." I wanted to argue that my cuts were fine for home cooking, that these small inconsistencies didn't really matter in the end. But I swallowed my pride and asked him to show me the correct technique. For the next 3 hours, I did nothing but cut vegetables. My hand cramped, my back ached, but slowly, gradually, my julienne became more consistent. 3 millimeters, 3 millimeters, 3 millimeters. "Better," Chef Rousseau said as he passed my station again. "Still not good, but better." I learned to take these crumbs of approval and treasure them. The weeks blurred together into a haze of techniques and tradition. We learned the 5 mother sauces: bechamel, velouté, espagnole, tomato, and hollandaise, and their infinite variations. We butchered whole chickens, fish, and rabbits, learning to respect and utilize every part of the animal. We made stocks that simmered for days, reducing and concentrating flavor until they became liquid gold. We learned how to make pâte à choux, puff pastry, and dozens of other fundamental preparations that formed the backbone of French cuisine. Every day, we were tested. Every dish we made was evaluated not just on taste, but on presentation, technique, timing, and adherence to classical methods. Chef Rousseau was unsparing in his criticism. I watched grown men cry into their failed soufflés. I saw the food blogger from Singapore quit after 4 weeks, unable to handle the constant critique. I discovered muscles I didn't know I had. My hands became even more scarred from burns and cuts. I lost 15 pounds from the combination of physical labor and being too exhausted to eat. I video called Robert late at night, sometimes in tears, sometimes exhilarated, often too tired to form coherent sentences. But something was happening. Slowly, methodically, I was transforming. By the 3rd month, my knife work was precise. My sauces achieved the exact consistency required. I could tell when a stock needed 10 more minutes just by the smell. My palate, already developed from years of cooking, became refined to an almost supernatural degree. I could identify individual spices in complex dishes, detect when cream was on the verge of breaking, sense when something needed just a pinch more salt to achieve perfect balance. Chef Rousseau began to acknowledge my progress. He said, "Madame Chen-Peiterson," he said one day in April as I presented a perfect duck confit, "you have surprised me. When you arrived, I thought you would last perhaps 2 weeks. But you have the most important quality for a chef. You are teachable. You have let go of your ego and become a student again. This is rare at your age." "Thank you, chef," I said, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the heat of the kitchen. "Do not thank me yet," he replied with a slight smile. "We still have much work to do. Your duck is acceptable, but it is not yet excellent. Come, let me show you how to improve it." In May, we began the section on modern French cuisine, the evolution of classical techniques into contemporary expressions. We studied under guest chefs from Michelin-starred restaurants, learning how to deconstruct traditional dishes and rebuild them with modern sensibilities. We experimented with molecular gastronomy, sous vide, and other innovative techniques while maintaining respect for classical foundations. It was during this module that I found my voice as a chef. While many of my classmates gravitated toward the more avant-garde approaches, I discovered that my strength lay in honoring tradition while making it accessible and adding subtle innovations. I took a classic coq au vin and brightened it with preserved lemon. I elevated a simple potato gratin with truffle oil and aged Comté cheese. I created a deconstructed beef bourguignon, the dish that David had so thoroughly mocked, that took the traditional flavors and presented them in a way that was elegant, refined, and unmistakably mine. When I presented this dish to Chef Rousseau, he tasted it in silence, his face unreadable. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, he set down his fork. "Madame," he said quietly, "this is the dish you were trying to make when you arrived, yes?" "Yes, chef, or at least it's inspired by it." "The dish that someone told you was, how did you put it?" "Terrible," I quoted, the words still stinging even months later. Chef Rousseau nodded slowly. "This person, he knew nothing. Your original dish, I suspect it was quite good, yes. Certainly good enough for a family dinner. But this," he gestured to the plate, "this is exceptional. This is the work of someone who understands not just technique, but philosophy. You have taken something traditional and made it your own without disrespecting its origins. This is what we call in French, la patte, the paw, the mark that distinguishes one chef from the other. You are developing your patte, Madame Ten Patterson. Continue this way." I left the kitchen that day walking on air. I called Robert immediately, unable to wait until our scheduled evening call. "He said I'm developing my paw," I told him, my voice trembling with emotion. "Your what now?" "My style, my signature. Robert, I'm actually doing this. I'm becoming a real chef." "Margaret," he said gently, "you've always been a real chef. Now you're just a trained one." The final test and the return home. The culmination of the program was a final examination that would determine whether we received our certification. We had to plan and execute a complete 6-course tasting menu for a group of visiting chefs and food critics. We would work alone, with no assistance, and we would be evaluated on everything from our mise en place to our final presentation. I spent 2 weeks planning my menu. Each dish needed to tell a story, showcase different techniques, and work together as a cohesive whole. I wanted to create something that honored my training while also reflecting my journey, where I came from, what I'd learned, and where I was going. My menu. First course. Amuse-bouche of salmon rillettes on crisp sourdough with microgreens, honoring my bread-making tradition. Second course. Corn soup with lobster and tarragon oil, inspired by the butternut squash soup David had rejected. Third course. Foie gras torchon with cherry gastrique and toasted brioche, pure French technique. Fourth course. My deconstructed beef bourguignon, the full circle moment. Fifth course. Duck breast with blackberry reduction and potato fondant, showcasing multiple advanced techniques. Sixth course. Chocolate delice with vanilla bean ice cream and hazelnut tuile, the grown-up version of my chocolate torte. The day of the examination, I arrived at the kitchen at 5 a.m. to begin my prep work. My hands were steady, my mind clear. Every element had been practiced dozens of times. I knew the rhythm of my menu, the timing of each component, the moment when everything needed to come together. The examination began at noon. In walked 5 judges: Chef Rousseau, 2 other instructors from the Institute, and 2 guest critics from major French food publications. They took their seats in the small dining room attached to our teaching kitchen, and I began to cook. For the next 4 hours, I existed in a state of flow I'd never experienced before. Every movement was precise, every decision confident. The salmon roulettes were perfectly seasoned, the sourdough crisp to golden perfection. The corn soup achieved a silky texture that coated the spoon. The foie gras torchon sliced clean and smooth. When I began plating the beef bourguignon, I thought of David. I thought of that dinner, that moment of humiliation, that crushing comment, and I smiled because the dish I was creating now, with its perfectly braised beef cheek, its precisely reduced wine sauce, its garnish of pearl onions and mushrooms arranged like a painting, was the answer to his contempt. It wasn't just about proving him wrong. It was about proving to myself what I was capable of when I refused to accept someone else's assessment of my worth. Each plate went out. Each came back empty. The judges made notes but gave no indication of their thoughts. Finally, after the last course was served and cleared, Chef Rousseau entered the kitchen. I was cleaning my station, my body exhausted but my spirit soaring. "Madame j'aime pas tasson," he said formally. "Please come to the dining room." My heart hammered as I walked through the door, still wearing my chef's whites, my hands trembling slightly. All 5 judges stood. Chef Rousseau spoke. "In my 40 years of teaching, I have evaluated perhaps 5,000 students. Most are competent. Some are good. Very few are excellent. You, madame, have surprised all of us. You came here as a home cook with raw talent, but little technique. You leave as a chef who understands not just the mechanics of cooking, but its soul. Your menu today was not the most technically complex we have seen, but it was perhaps the most honest. Every dish told us who you are, where you have been, and what you have learned. This is rare. This is precious." He picked up a certificate from the table. "It is with great pleasure that I award you the distinction of graduating with honors from the Institut Culinaire de Paris. You have earned the title of chef. Wear it with pride." I couldn't speak. Tears streamed down my face as I accepted the certificate, as the other judges shook my hand and offered congratulations, as Chef Rousseau embraced me in a brief but warm hug. "Now," he said, stepping back, "go home, open your restaurant, and send me the address so I can visit and see what you create." I returned to Portland in December, 1 year and 11 months after David's insult. The transformation wasn't just in my cooking. It was in how I carried myself, how I saw the world, how I understood my own value. Robert picked me up from the airport, and as we drove through the familiar streets of Portland, he kept glancing at me with a smile. "What?" I finally asked. "You look different," he said. "I mean, you look like you, but more." "More what?" "Just more. More confident, more present, more powerful." He reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, Margaret," he said. "Thank you for giving me this gift," I said softly. "I know it wasn't just financial. You held down the fort, managed everything here, supported me from thousands of miles away. I couldn't have done this without you." "We're partners," he said simply. "Always have been, always will be. Now, are you ready to see your restaurant?" Building the dream. The space Robert had secured was a former textile warehouse in Portland's Division Street neighborhood, an area that had undergone significant gentrification in recent years and was now home to some of the city's most exciting restaurants and shops. The building was over 100 years old, with exposed brick walls, high ceilings with original wooden beams, and large windows that flooded the space with natural light. It was perfect, and it was completely empty. Over the next 8 months, Robert and I poured every ounce of our energy and a substantial portion of our savings into transforming this raw space into a restaurant. We worked with architects and designers, but I insisted on being involved in every decision. I learned in Paris that a restaurant isn't just about the food, it's about the complete experience. I wanted to create something that felt both elegant and welcoming, sophisticated but not stuffy. We kept the exposed brick and wooden beams, adding modern lighting fixtures that cast a warm glow. The floor was polished concrete, the tables a mix of wood and marble. We built an open kitchen with a chef's counter where diners could watch the cooking process, a nod to the transparency and education I'd experienced in Paris. The most challenging aspect was building the team. I needed skilled cooks who could execute at a high level, but I also needed people who shared my philosophy about food, that it should honor tradition, showcase quality ingredients, and tell a story. I hired Marcus as my sous chef. My son had been cooking casually for years, but had never pursued it professionally. After seeing my transformation, he'd quit his job in marketing and enrolled in a local culinary program. He had natural talent and, more importantly, understood my vision instinctively.
For the rest of the kitchen staff, I recruited from culinary schools and other restaurants, looking for people who were technically skilled, but also hungry to learn and grow. I built a team of 6, Marcus as sous chef, 2 line cooks, a pastry chef, a prep cook, and a dishwasher who'd worked in restaurants for 20 years and whose experience proved invaluable. For the front of house, I hired Sandra, a veteran restaurant manager who'd worked in fine dining for 30 years, and a team of servers who understood that hospitality was about making people feel valued and comfortable, not about pretension or gatekeeping. During these months of preparation, I had limited contact with Emily and David. Emily would call occasionally, but conversations were strained. She never asked about the restaurant, and I never brought it up. As far as I knew, David had no idea what I'd been doing for the past 2 years. I didn't want him to know. Not yet. We decided to name the restaurant Reverie, a nod to both the dreamlike quality of the food I wanted to create and my own journey of following a late-in-life dream. Our logo was simple. The word Reverie in an elegant font with a small illustration of a cooking pot that, on closer inspection, was also a cloud. I spent months developing the opening menu. It would be a prefixed tasting menu, 6 courses, with optional wine pairings that would change seasonally. Every dish needed to meet the standards I'd learned in Paris, while also reflecting the incredible ingredients available in the Pacific Northwest. The opening menu. Course 1, Pacific oyster with champagne mignonette and pickled shallot. Course 2, butter lettuce salad with herbs, edible flowers, and Meyer lemon vinaigrette. Course 3, sablefish with miso beurre blanc, baby vegetables, and dashi. Course 4, duck breast with cherry gastrique, rainbow chard, and potato pave. Course 5, wagyu beef with red wine reduction, bone marrow, and seasonal mushrooms. Course 6, dark chocolate tart with olive oil ice cream and sea salt. The menu was priced at $175 per person, expensive for Portland, but deliberately positioned as a special occasion destination. With wine pairings, the total came to $285 per person. We had seating for 48 guests and planned to do 2 seatings per evening, Wednesday through Sunday. If we succeeded, the math was compelling. If we failed, we'd lose everything we'd invested. Opening night and the unexpected guest. We opened Reverie on a Friday in late August, almost 3 years to the day after David's insulting comment. The soft opening for friends, family, and industry colleagues had gone well the previous week, but this was our first night open to the public. I was terrified. At 5 p.m., I gathered my team in the kitchen. "Everyone," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "tonight we show Portland what we're capable of. We've trained for this. We've prepared for this.
Every dish that goes out of this kitchen represents not just our skill, but our respect for our guests and our craft. Let's make it excellent." "Yes, chef," they responded in unison, and we got to work. The first seating was fully booked, 24 reservations, mostly from people who'd read the preview articles in local food blogs and magazines. I worked the pass, calling out orders and inspecting every plate before it went to the dining room. The rhythm of service was exhilarating. Order fires, plates go up, dishes come back clean. The kitchen was hot, loud, and chaotic in the way that only a restaurant kitchen can be. But there was a synchronicity to it, a dance we'd choreographed through weeks of practice. Around 7 p.m., Sandra came back to the kitchen, her face unreadable. "Chef," she said quietly, "there's someone here asking for you." "Can it wait?" I asked, focused on plating a duck breast. "We're in the middle of service." It's David and Emily." My hands froze. The knife I was holding clattered to the cutting board. "What?" "Your son-in-law and daughter. They just walked in, no reservation. They're asking if there's room for two." I looked at Marcus, whose face had gone dark. "Should I tell them we're fully booked?" he asked, with an edge to his voice. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. This wasn't how I'd imagined this moment. I'd imagined David learning about the restaurant through reviews, maybe making a reservation weeks in advance, walking in with no idea that the chef was his once mocked mother-in-law. This surprise appearance felt like it could derail everything. But then I thought about what Chef Rousseau had said. In cuisine, as in life, you must be ready for the unexpected. The mark of a true chef is not perfect execution when everything goes according to plan, but grace under pressure when it does not. "Seat them," I said. "If someone doesn't show for the second seating, put them at table 9. Table 9 was at the chef's counter, directly facing the pass, directly facing me. "Are you sure?" Sandra asked.
"I'm sure," I replied, returning to my duck breast with renewed focus. "And Sandra, don't tell them I'm the chef. Not yet." 2 spots did open up for the second seating, a reservation canceled 30 minutes before due to a family emergency. Sandra seated Emily and David at exactly 8 p.m. I watched them from the pass as they settled in. Emily looked nervous, glancing around the restaurant with wide eyes. She was dressed up, a cocktail dress I had never seen before, and kept touching her hair self-consciously. David, by contrast, looked completely at ease in his expensive, casual wear, already studying the wine list with the confidence of someone who expected to be catered to. They were close enough that I could hear fragments of their conversation. "I still can't believe we got in," Emily was saying. "This place has been impossible to book. How did you even hear about it?" Tech thread. Some of the guys have been raving about it. Supposedly, the chef trained in Paris, and it's like getting a Michelin star experience for a fraction of the price. Should be interesting. "It's expensive, though," Emily said quietly. "Maybe we should—" Relax. We can afford it. Besides, you need to experience what real fine dining is like. Remember your mom's cooking?" He laughed, and I felt that familiar flare of anger in my chest. This will be actual French cuisine done right. Emily's face flushed, and she looked down at her menu without responding. I took a moment to steady myself, then called out, "Ordering 1 complete tasting menu, table 9. "Yes, chef," my team responded. For the next 2 hours, I poured everything I had learned, everything I had become, into their meal. Each course was executed with precision and care. I inspected every element multiple times before allowing plates to go out. From my position at the pass, I could see their reactions. The oyster went out first, and I watched David's eyebrows rise in surprise. He said something to Emily that I couldn't hear, but his posture had changed. He was sitting up straighter, paying attention. The salad prompted a visible pause. He lifted a forkful to examine it before tasting, then nodded appreciatively. But it was the third course, the sable fish, that truly captured his attention. I saw him take the first bite, close his eyes and sit in silence for a moment. He said something to Emily, who tasted her own and smiled widely.
The duck, the beef, each course built upon the last. I watched as David's demeanor shifted from casual interest to genuine engagement. He was no longer just eating, he was analyzing, appreciating, experiencing. He called Sandra over twice to ask about preparations, about the sourcing of ingredients, about the chef's background. The chef prefers to let the food speak for itself, Sandra replied diplomatically, exactly as I'd instructed her. When the final course, the chocolate tart, was placed before them, I watched Emily close her eyes in what looked like pure bliss after the first bite. David was nodding, making notes on his phone. Finally, after they'd finished, David requested to speak to the chef. He'd like to compliment the chef personally, Sandra informed me, returning to the kitchen with their empty dessert plates. Should I bring you out? This was it. The moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since that awful dinner 3 years ago. I untied my apron, smoothed down my chef's whites, and checked my reflection in the stainless steel of the refrigerator. My hair, now more silver than brown, was pulled back under my chef's toque. My face showed the lines of 65 years, but also something else: confidence, competence, authority. "Let's do this," I said. I walked out of the kitchen and approached table 9. Emily saw me first, and I watched the recognition dawn on her face like sunrise. Confusion, then shock, then something that looked like awe. "Mom," she whispered. David turned around, his hand extended for a handshake, his practiced compliments clearly ready. Then he saw me. His hand froze midair. His mouth opened, then closed. For perhaps the first time since I'd known him, David was completely speechless. "Good evening," I said calmly, professionally. "I'm Chef Margaret Chen Patterson, owner and executive chef of Reverie. I understand you wanted to speak with me." "Margaret?" David finally managed. You did this?" "I did," I replied simply. Emily stood up abruptly and threw her arms around me. "Mom, oh my God, this is incredible. This is your restaurant? You're a chef? When did this? How did you—" She was crying, laughing, squeezing me tight. "I can't believe you didn't tell me. This is amazing." Over Emily's shoulder, I watched David's face cycle through emotions: shock, confusion, and then, if I wasn't mistaken, embarrassment. He remembered. I could see it in his eyes. He was remembering that dinner, those words, that casual cruelty. "David," I said as Emily released me, "you wanted to speak to the chef?" He cleared his throat, stood up, and for once looked genuinely uncomfortable. Yes, the meal was exceptional, truly exceptional. The technique, the flavors, the presentation, it was all Michelin star quality work. The sablefish in particular was one of the best dishes I've had in years, and that's including meals at some of the top restaurants in New York and San Francisco. "Thank you," I said. "That's very kind."
"Margaret," he said, and his voice had lost all its usual confidence. "I need to apologize. 3 years ago, I said some things about your cooking that were—" "Unforgivably rude?" I offered. "Yes, unforgivably rude, and apparently completely wrong. I was an arrogant ass, and I hurt you, and I've regretted it ever since. Emily told me how much that dinner meant to you, how much work you put into it, and I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry." I studied him for a moment. The apology seemed genuine, but I wondered if he would have offered it if I were still just his mother-in-law cooking in her home kitchen, rather than the chef of a restaurant he'd just raved about. "David," I said carefully, "do you know why your apology is meaningless to me?" He looked stricken. Emily's eyes widened. "Not because I'm not willing to forgive you," I continued, "but because I don't need your validation anymore. 3 years ago, your opinion mattered because I was unsure of myself. I had spent decades cooking without ever really testing whether I was good or just surrounded by people who loved me. Your cruelty, while painful, gave me a gift. It made me question everything and pursue the truth. I went to Paris. I trained under one of the greatest chefs in France. I learned that I did have talent, but I also had gaps in my knowledge and technique. I filled those gaps. I became the chef I always had the potential to be. I gestured around the restaurant. This isn't about proving you wrong, David. This is about proving to myself what I'm capable of. Your opinion, whether you love my food or hate it, is irrelevant to my sense of self-worth. I cook for people who appreciate it, and if you're one of those people, you're welcome here. But I don't need your approval. There was a long silence. David nodded slowly, his face red. I understand, he said quietly, and for what it's worth, I do appreciate it. This meal was extraordinary. Then I hope you'll come back, I said with a slight smile. We change the menu seasonally, and I think you'll find each iteration equally compelling. Your bill has been taken care of for this evening. Consider it a family courtesy, but future visits will be at our standard rate. Of course, he said. Thank you, Margaret. Chef. As I walked back to the kitchen, Emily caught my hand. Mom, she said, tears streaming down her face, I'm so proud of you. I had no idea you were doing all this. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed to do it for myself first, but I'm glad you came tonight. I'm glad you both saw this. Can I come back tomorrow? Can I bring Sarah and Thomas and Marcus's family? I want everyone to see what you've built. Of course, I said, kissing her forehead, but you'll need a reservation. We're booked solid for the next 2 months. Her jaw dropped. 2 months? I smiled. Welcome to Reverie, sweetheart. The rise of Reverie. The reviews started coming in within a week of opening. Portland Monthly called Reverie a revelation, proof that Portland's dining scene can compete with any city in the world. The Oregonian's food critic wrote a glowing piece titled, A Chef is Born, How Margaret Chen Patterson is Redefining Portland Fine Dining. Eater Portland featured us in their essential restaurants list within the first month. But the review that meant the most to me came from an unexpected source. 3 months after opening, a man in his 70s walked in for the first seating, alone. He was seated at the chef's counter, and I didn't recognize him until he sent a note back to the kitchen requesting to see me. Chef Rousseau, I gasped when I came out to greet him. Bonjour, Madame Chen Patterson. Or should I say, Chef Chen Patterson. You sent me the address, no? I was in San Francisco for a conference, so I thought, why not visit Portland and see what my student has accomplished? I was speechless. My mentor, the man who had pushed me harder than anyone ever had, was sitting at my chef's counter. Please, I said, let me cook for you. That is why I am here, he replied. I returned to the kitchen and told Marcus, we're cooking for Chef Rousseau tonight. Everything must be perfect. Who's Chef Rousseau? One of the line cooks asked. My teacher from Paris, one of the greatest chefs in France, no pressure or anything. But this is the most important meal we've ever cooked. The team rose to the challenge. Every dish that went out was inspected with even more scrutiny than usual. I tasted everything twice, adjusted seasonings with obsessive precision, and made sure each plate looked flawless. Chef Rousseau ate in silence, making small notes in a leather journal he'd brought with him. My heart hammered with each course. After the final dish was cleared, he requested to see me again. Well, I asked, unable to hide my anxiety. Sit, he commanded, gesturing to the seat beside him. I have notes. My heart sank. Notes meant criticism. I sat. Your technique is excellent, he began. The sable fish was perfectly cooked. You have clearly mastered temperature control. Your sauces have the proper consistency and balance. Your plating is elegant without being overwrought. But, I prompted, knowing there had to be a but. But, he continued, you are holding back. I see in your food the techniques I taught you, and that is good. But I do not see enough of you. Remember what I told you about la patte, your mark. You were beginning to develop it in Paris, but here you are being too careful, too classical. This is good food, chef, but it could be great food if you were braver.
Braver how? I asked. You are a woman who came to Paris at 62 years old to learn French cuisine. You transformed yourself completely. This took tremendous courage, but now you are playing it safe. You are cooking what you think a French-trained chef should cook, not what Margaret Chen Patterson wants to cook. Where are the flavors of your childhood? Where is your Chinese heritage? Where is your American boldness? Why are you hiding these parts of yourself? His words hit me like a physical blow. He was right. I had been so focused on proving I could execute classical French technique that I'd forgotten to infuse it with my own identity. I was afraid, I admitted. Afraid that if I deviated too much from classical preparation, people would think I didn't know what I was doing, that I was just some home cook playing at being a chef. And this matters to you? What people think? He shook his head. Chef, you have already proven yourself. Now it is time to be yourself. The greatest chefs, Ducasse, Bra, Keller, Chang, they all learned the classics and then found ways to express their own voice. This is what separates a good chef from a great one. You have the skill. Now you must have the courage. We talked for another hour about food and philosophy, about the restaurant industry and the evolution of cuisine. When he finally left, he embraced me warmly. I will return in 1 year, he said. I want to see what you create when you stop trying to be a French chef and simply be Margaret. His words echoed in my mind for weeks. I began to experiment, to push boundaries, to incorporate the flavors and techniques from my Chinese-American upbringing alongside my French training. The results were revelatory. I created a dish of 5-spice duck with hoisin gastrique and scallion pancake, a fusion of French and Chinese techniques that told the story of my heritage. I made a Dungeness crab congee with shaved truffle and crispy shallots. I took my grandmother's lion's head meatballs and reimagined them with French technique. Pork and veal ground by hand, braised in a rich stock, served with baby bok choy that had been treated like endive. The whole dish finished with a delicate soy butter sauce. The new menu launched in January, 4 months after opening, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. The food press called it a bold evolution and the most exciting menu in Portland. Reservations, which had already been hard to come by, became nearly impossible to get. And David? David became a regular. The $500 plate. Emily told me later that something had shifted in David after that first meal at Reverie. He'd always been a foodie, someone who enjoyed expensive meals and took pride in his sophisticated palate. But after experiencing my restaurant, it became almost an obsession. He came back 2 weeks after that initial visit, this time with a reservation, bringing 4 colleagues from his company. They ordered wine pairings with every course and stayed late into the evening discussing each dish in detail. The bill for their table came to $2,400. Then he came back the following month with Emily's family for her mother's birthday, 8 people, including my grandchildren, for a private dining experience in our small private room, $3,800. He brought his parents when they visited from New York. He brought his investors. He brought his board of directors. He became known among the staff as the regular, the guy who came in at least once a month, always ordered the full tasting menu with wine pairings, and tipped generously. But more than that, he became an evangelist. I learned through Emily that he talked about Reverie constantly in his tech circles, that he'd written a detailed review on his personal blog, which had thousands of followers in the tech industry, that he had called in favors to get food writers and critics to visit, that he was single-handedly responsible for a significant portion of our business from the tech community. He feels guilty, Emily told me one afternoon when she stopped by the restaurant between lunch and dinner service, about what he said to you. He knows you've forgiven him, but he hasn't forgiven himself. This is his way of making amends, supporting your restaurant, sending people here, basically becoming your biggest promoter. He doesn't need to do that, I said. I know, but he wants to. And honestly, Mom, I think it's changed him.
He's more thoughtful now, more aware of how his words affect people. Having something he said turn out to be so catastrophically wrong, it humbled him in a way nothing else has. You don't know what he was like when we first got together. He thought he was right about everything, that his opinion was fact. Now he questions himself more, listens more. You changed him. I thought about this as I prepped vegetables for the evening service. I hadn't set out to change David. I'd set out to change myself. But maybe that's how growth works. When we transform ourselves, we inevitably affect the people around us.
The real moment of reckoning came about 18 months after opening. By this point, Reverie had been nominated for a James Beard Award for Best New Restaurant, had received glowing reviews in national publications, and had a wait list for reservations that extended months into the future. It was a Thursday evening, and we were hosting a special tasting event. A 10-course menu showcasing the best of the season, priced at $500 per person. We'd limited it to 20 guests, and it had sold out within hours of announcing it. David had secured 2 seats. As I worked the pass that night, calling out orders and inspecting plates, I found myself thinking about that dinner 3 years and 9 months ago. The humiliation I'd felt, the doubt that had crept in, the decision to prove to myself, not to David, what I was capable of. The evening's menu was my most ambitious yet. It included courses that took days to prepare, a 72-hour short rib with bone marrow and fermented vegetables, a custard made with century eggs and caviar, a dessert that incorporated traditional Chinese sesame paste with French pastry technique. Every plate that went out was a small work of art, a story told through food about tradition and innovation, about respecting the past while embracing the future, about finding your voice and refusing to be silenced. When the final course was served and the guests had finished, Sandra came back to the kitchen with the note. "From table 6, she said, handing it to me. I opened it. In David's distinctive handwriting, "Thank you for proving me wrong. Thank you for being brave enough to show me what real excellence looks like. And thank you for letting me be part of your journey, even though I didn't deserve it. This meal was transcendent. D." I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. Then I did something I never usually did during service. I walked out to the dining room. David and Emily were the last to leave. They stood as I approached. "Chef," David said formally, "that was the best meal of my life. And I've eaten at Noma, at 11 Madison Park, at French Laundry. Nothing compares to what you created tonight." "Thank you," I said. "That means a great deal coming from someone with your experience." He said, his voice dropping, "I hope that someday I can tell this story about how I insulted a chef's cooking and 3 years later was paying $500 a plate to eat her food. It would make one hell of a lesson about hubris." I smiled. "You can tell it whenever you want, David, but maybe change the ending." "What do you mean?" "The story isn't about you paying $500 to eat my food. It's about someone finding the courage to transform themselves, regardless of what anyone else thought. Your insult was the catalyst, but this journey was always mine. The ending is that I discovered who I was meant to be, not in spite of your criticism, but independently of it." He nodded slowly. "You're right. That is a better ending. Besides," I added with a slight smirk, "you're paying $500 a plate not because you have to, but because you want to. That's the biggest difference of all." The numbers don't lie. Over the next 2 years, I kept a private record, not out of spite or vindication, but out of pure curiosity. How much had David actually spent at Reverie since that first unplanned visit? The numbers were staggering. First visit comped $570, what the bill would have been. Visit 2 with colleagues, $2,400.
Visit 3 for birthday dinner, $3,800. Visit 4 with parents, $1,200. Visit 5 with investors, $4,500. Visit 6 date night, $650. Visit 7 with board members, $6,800. Monthly visits for the following 18 months, averaging $800 per visit, $14,400. Special tasting events, 4 events at an average of $1,200, $4,800. Private dining experiences, 3 events averaging $3,000, $9,000. Wine purchases for home through our small retail program, $8,400. And on it went. By my calculation, in the 3 years and 8 months since we'd opened, David had personally spent or been responsible for approximately $487,000 at my restaurant. Almost $500,000. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd said my cooking tasted like cafeteria scrapings had spent the equivalent of a small house in Portland dining at my establishment. But here's what mattered more than the money. Reverie had become something bigger than I'd ever imagined. We'd won multiple awards. We'd been featured in Bon Appetit, Food and Wine, and even gotten a mention in the New York Times roundup of America's most exciting new chefs over 60. I'd been invited to cook at the James Beard House in New York. Chef Rousseau had visited 3 more times and proclaimed that I'd finally found my voice. Most importantly, I'd created a space where people could experience the kind of transformation I'd experienced, not through cooking necessarily, but through the realization that excellence knows no age limit, that it's never too late to pursue a dream, that other people's opinions of us matter far less than our opinion of ourselves. It's been 4 years now since David's comment. Reverie is in its 3rd year of operation and just received our first Michelin star, the only 1-star restaurant in Portland, and only the 3rd Michelin-starred restaurant in Oregon. The day the announcement came, my entire family gathered at the restaurant to celebrate. Emily and David, of course, my other children and their families, Robert, who'd supported me through every step of this unlikely journey, my kitchen team, many of whom had been with me since the beginning, our front-of-house staff, who'd created the warm, professional atmosphere that made Reverie special. We opened champagne, a Krug that David had brought, of course. As we toasted, I looked around at these faces. These people who'd believed in me or learned to believe in me, or in David's case, been forced to reckon with having underestimated me. I want to say something, I announced, and the room quieted. 4 years ago, someone told me my cooking was terrible. At the time, those words devastated me, but they also freed me. They freed me to stop seeking validation from others and start seeking truth for myself. They pushed me to test my limits, to train properly, to discover what I was actually capable of creating. I looked at David, who had the grace to look embarrassed. I don't tell this story to shame anyone, I continued. I tell it because I think we all have a moment, or many moments, when someone's low opinion of us forces us to make a choice. We can accept their assessment and diminish ourselves accordingly, or we can use it as fuel to prove something to ourselves. Not to them, to ourselves. I raised my glass higher. Today, an organization of culinary experts gave this restaurant a Michelin star. It's a tremendous honor. But the real achievement wasn't earning that star. It was having the courage to try. So here's to courage. Here's to transformation. And here's to never letting anyone else define what you're capable of. Hear, hear, everyone chorused, and we drank. Later, as people were leaving, David approached me one more time. "Margaret," he said, "I know I've apologized before, but I need to say it again. What I said that night was cruel and wrong. And while I'm grateful that it inadvertently led to all this," he gestured around the restaurant, "I'm also genuinely sorry for the pain I caused. I know you are, and I've forgiven you.
But David, can I tell you something? Of course. I'm glad you said what you said. He looked shocked. You are? I am. Because you were probably right, in a way. My cooking that night was good. It was even very good. But it wasn't excellent. It was the cooking of someone who'd never pushed herself, never truly tested her limits. Your comment, as harsh as it was, made me realize I'd been coasting on natural talent and the kindness of people who love me. It forced me to get real about whether I was actually good or just okay. And that question, that honest reckoning, led me to Paris, to Reverie, to this. I paused, choosing my words carefully. So yes, I forgive you. But more than that, I thank you. You gave me a gift, even though you didn't mean to. You gave me the push I needed to become who I was always meant to be. David's eyes were glistening. You're a remarkable person, Margaret. I'm honored to know you. And I'm honored to cook for you, even at $500 a plate. We both laughed, and in that moment, the last of the tension that had existed between us for 4 years finally dissolved completely. The legacy. Today, Reverie continues to thrive. We've expanded our seating by 10 covers, though we maintain the intimate atmosphere that made us special. I've published a cookbook, Reverie, a late bloomer's guide to French Chinese cuisine, that became a surprise bestseller. I've been profiled in magazines and podcasts, not just as a chef, but as an example of what's possible when you refuse to accept limitations based on age or circumstance. I still cook service most nights, though I've trained Marcus to the point where he can run the kitchen when I need a break. My team has grown to include 2 former Institut Culinaire graduates who specifically sought me out as a mentor. We've become a destination for older culinary students who want to stage or intern somewhere that values experience alongside youth. The restaurant continues to evolve. Our menu changes seasonally, and I'm always pushing myself to find new ways to express the fusion of my French training and Chinese American heritage. Some experiments fail. Not every innovation works, but we learn from each one. David remains a regular, though his visits have settled into a rhythm of about once every 6 months. He brings different people each time. Business contacts, friends visiting from out of town, occasionally just Emily for date night. He's become more than a customer. He's become a genuine supporter and, strangely enough, a friend. Last month, he did something that surprised me. He brought his teenage nephew, who was considering culinary school but was worried about the intense competition and criticism inherent in the restaurant industry. He told the young man, I want you to meet Chef Margaret. I want her to tell you the story of how she became a chef, and I want you to hear what I said to her before she started this journey. So I told the story, the whole story, including David's cafeteria floor comment, to this earnest young man who hung on every word. When I finished, David added his own coda. The point isn't that I was wrong, though I absolutely was. The point is that Chef Margaret didn't let my wrongness define her. She let it motivate her. And that's the difference between people who make it in this industry and people who don't. The critics, the brutal hours, the physical demands, the constant judgment, all of that will try to break you. Your job is to let it forge you instead. The nephew enrolled in culinary school the following week. Reflections on revenge, redemption, and remarkable food. People sometimes ask me if Reverie is my revenge on David. The answer is complicated. In the immediate aftermath of his insult, yes, there was an element of I'll show him. Wounded pride is a powerful motivator. But as I progressed through culinary school, as I built the restaurant, as I developed my voice as a chef, the motivation shifted. Revenge requires that you remain focused on the person who wronged you. But I discovered that the most satisfying form of success is the kind that frees you from needing anyone's approval. David's eventual appreciation of my cooking was gratifying, sure, but it wasn't necessary. I would have been just as proud of Reverie, just as fulfilled by my work, if he'd never eaten here at all. The real victory wasn't making David pay $500 a plate for my food. The real victory was discovering that I could create food worth $500 a plate, that I could train myself, push myself, and achieve something I'd only dreamed of in my younger years. Now, at 66, I have a career I love, a restaurant that bears my vision, a team that respects and learns from me, and the knowledge that age is irrelevant when it comes to pursuing excellence. I've proven, to myself, not to David, that transformation is always possible, that it's never too late to become who you are meant to be. Would I have done all this without David's cruel comment? Honestly, I don't know. Maybe I would have continued cooking wonderful meals for my family and friends, content in my own small sphere. Maybe I would have eventually pursued culinary training anyway. Or maybe I would have lived my whole life with a kernel of doubt about whether my cooking was actually special or just loved because it came from me. David's insult forced me to confront that doubt head on, and in doing so, it gave me something precious: certainty. I know now, beyond any question, that I can cook, really cook, at the highest level. That knowledge, that confidence, that hard-won expertise, that's worth more than any revenge. The final word. Almost. Last week, a food critic from a major national publication came to Reverie for a review. She arrived unannounced, as critics do, and ordered a full tasting menu. I didn't know she was there until Sandra quietly informed me mid-service. My heart rate spiked. It still does when I know I'm being formally evaluated. But I took a breath and focused on what I could control: cooking the best meal possible with the best ingredients available that day. After her meal, she requested to speak with me. I came out, still in my chef's whites, to find a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a notebook full of detailed observations. "Chef Chen Patterson," she said, "I need to ask you something. I've been researching your background and I'm fascinated by your story. You started cooking professionally at 62? That's almost unheard of in this industry. What made you take that leap so late in life?" I considered how to answer. I could tell her about David, about the insult, about the wounded pride that started everything. That would make a good story, the kind of narrative journalists love. But that wasn't the whole truth, or even the most important truth. "I took the leap," I said carefully, "because I realized I'd been standing on the edge my whole life, looking down, wondering if I could fly. Age didn't make me jump. It just finally gave me the clarity to understand that the only way to find out was to try. I was afraid I'd fall, but it turned out I had wings all along. I just needed to use them." She smiled and wrote something in her notebook. "That's beautiful. One more question. What would you say to other people who have dreams they've deferred, who think they're too old or too late to start something new?" I thought for a moment, then said, "I'd tell them that other people's opinions, both their praise and their criticism, are irrelevant to what you're actually capable of. I'd tell them that the worst kind of regret isn't failure. It's never trying. And I'd tell them that the best time to start was 20 years ago, but the second best time is right now." "And what about the critics in your life?" she asked. "The people who tell you you're not good enough?" I smiled. "Thank them for the motivation, then prove them wrong. Not for their sake, for yours." The review came out 2 weeks ago. It was glowing, a love letter to Reverie, to the food, to the philosophy behind it all. But the part that got shared most widely on social media was the final paragraph. In an industry obsessed with young prodigies and wunderkind chefs, Margaret Chen Patterson is a radical reminder that greatness has no expiration date. She started her professional cooking career at an age when most people are thinking about retirement, and she has created something that rivals the work of chefs with decades more experience. Reverie isn't just an excellent restaurant, it's proof that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. And that message, like her food, is something we all need to taste. I framed that paragraph and hung it in my office, right next to my diploma from the Institut Culinaire de Paris and a photo from our Michelin star ceremony. But the most meaningful thing in that office isn't any award or article. It's a handwritten note from my granddaughter, Emily's oldest daughter, who's now 15. It says, "Grandma, you're so cool. When I grow up, I want to be brave like you. I want to do something that scares me and do it anyway. Thank you for showing me that's possible. I love you." That note, more than any Michelin star or glowing review, is the real legacy of this journey.
The perfect ending. Or is it? So here we are, at the end of this story. David, the man who mocked my cooking, has indeed paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to eat my food over the past 4 years. That's a satisfying narrative arc, isn't it? The insulter becomes the biggest fan. The dismissive son-in-law becomes a devoted customer. Justice served, along with perfectly executed French-Chinese cuisine. But that's not really the ending, because the story is still being written. Tonight, we have a full reservation book. Tomorrow, we'll prep for the weekend service. Next month, we're hosting a collaboration dinner with a Michelin-starred chef from Singapore. Next year, who knows? The real ending, if there has to be one, is this. I learned that validation has to come from within, that other people's opinions of us are just that, opinions, not facts, that age is irrelevant in the face of determination, that it's never too late to transform yourself completely. And I learned that the best revenge isn't making someone pay $500 a plate for your food. The best revenge is becoming so excellent at what you do that their initial criticism becomes irrelevant, a footnote in a much larger story about courage, growth, and the relentless pursuit of your own potential. David didn't make me a chef. I made me a chef. He just gave me the push I didn't know I needed. And for that, despite the pain, despite the humiliation, despite everything, I'm genuinely grateful. So thank you, David, for underestimating me. It was the best thing you ever did. Now, before you go rushing off to share this story with everyone you know, and trust me, you're going to want to, I need you to do something for me. Do you see that subscribe button looking all lonely down there? The one that's practically begging for attention? Yeah, that one. Give it a little love tap. Click it like it's the Order Now button at a restaurant where you're absolutely starving and the menu looks incredible. And that like button? The one sitting there pretending it doesn't care if you click it, but secretly hoping you will? Show it some appreciation. Hit it like you're tenderizing a perfect cut of beef with purpose and enthusiasm. Because here's the thing. This isn't just a story about cooking. It's a story about transformation, about courage, about refusing to let anyone else define your limits. And if it resonated with you, if somewhere in your heart you felt that flutter of, maybe I could do that thing I've been putting off, then you owe it to yourself and to everyone else who needs to hear this message to share it. Subscribe like your future self is counting on you, like your dreams depend on it. Because who knows, maybe the story that finally pushes you to take that leap, to start that business, to go back to school, to try that thing you've been afraid to try, maybe that story is waiting for you in the next video. And if you don't subscribe and like, well, I'll just assume you're the type of person who thought my beef bourguignon tasted like cafeteria floor scrapings. And we both know how that turned out. So go ahead, make your grandmother proud. Click those buttons. I'll be here in my Michelin-starred restaurant waiting to tell you more stories about late bloomers who changed the world. Chef Margaret Chen Patterson, signing off.